Okay. Good morning, guys. It's Sunday morning. I'm doing this podcast real quick. I want to kind of set up three, or actually probably four podcasts for you guys. This one is going to be about cell membranes. And this is kind of what we talked about last week. A lot of folks were out last week for a couple days or a day or two. And so I just really kind of want to cover a couple things that we talked about in class. Membranes are all throughout our cell. In this cell, for example, we have a membrane that is all around the cell. But we also know that in addition to the cell membrane, for eukaryotic cells, we have a nuclear membrane. And we also have membranes that surround those organelles. In fact, we call them membrane-bound organelles because they are in fact bound by a membrane. And in this picture here, these actually are organelles of different types in this cell, and they are bound by a membrane. So we'll take a close look at what those membranes are. You can also see here, we talked about the cytoplasm last week. This is actually the two different types of cytoplasm. Remember, we had microtubules and microfilaments, and so we can see that here stained in green as well as in red. So, and the actual membranes are made up of what we call our phospholipids, and we've talked about these quite a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and draw some more again. This is a phosphate group here, and the phosphate group here, remember, is hydrophilic. They love water or don't mind having water next to them. Okay, and these are the fatty acid tails, and these are hydrophobic, which means they're water fearing and they do not like water. So water will often not be anywhere near those tails. And so what happens naturally is that when we have a cell, or even if we just go out and blow bubbles, because these are water fearing, they tend to pull together and form a circle. And so when we look at bubbles, that's actually what naturally happens. Okay. Go to the next slide. I want to just talk again a little bit about the phospholipids. This area right here that is actually water loving or will be around water, it's a polar region of the molecule. And this area right here that does not like water, that's actually more of the hydrophobic region of the molecule, but it's also a non-polar region. And non-polar means that it is actually of the same charge. And remember, water is a polar molecule, which means it has uneven distribution of charges. So when these get together, you basically won't find water in here when these get together in the molecule. Now notice there's that kink. We talked about the kink in biochemistry. We have a double bond here. These carbons are unsaturated with hydrogens, which means that it basically helps maintain the fluidity of this membrane, which is really, really critical for life. All right. Now I want to talk about all the different things that are in a cell membrane or nuclear membrane, or for that matter, any membrane. And so there's a couple of key components. The first key component is basically these big, large proteins. And these proteins are going to be used in transport, but they will allow molecules to go through, in and out of a cell. In fact, this is a channel protein right here. And any small molecule that is able to go with the concentration gradient can go right through this channel protein. And so these large proteins that are seen on both sides of this membrane help in transport molecules. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. All right. Now I want to focus on some of this other stuff here on top. Let's go and talk about glycolipids. You know that glyco actually means sugar, and we know what lipids are. So these are actually sugars. These are all the sugars right up here attached to lipids, the same kind of lipids that are over here in phospholipids. And so these are actually really key in cell communication. If we have one cell, and this is really not to scale, but let's just assume that these are these glycolipids, and it comes upon another cell with some other glycolipids. This is actually how cells can communicate with direct cell-to-cell communication. And so these glycolipids are very important in cell communication. All right, I want to talk about a couple more things that are in the cell membrane. The next molecule we'll talk about here is cholesterol. And so with cholesterol, we see cholesterol embedded in the membrane here. And it's very important to the cell. Cholesterol actually helps the cell maintain fluidity. And we've seen this before. We talked about how that kink in the phospholipid helps maintain fluidity, but also cholesterol is very, very critical. We want certain things to be able to get in and out of the cell. And if the cell is not fluid, that would not be able to happen. Essentially, gases and other small molecules and ions would not be able to do that. So it's very critical that cholesterol is in our cell membranes. And we often think of cholesterol as being bad, but this is an example where we need that good cholesterol that we eat to help our cell membranes. All right. And then I want to talk about glycoproteins. Glycoproteins are also seen on the surface of the cell. Those are essentially sugars attached to a protein. And remember, sugars are the same as carbohydrates. And they have several functions. They also are involved in cell-cell communication, but glycoproteins are very critical, and we'll see a lot of those on the cell surface as well. Remember that water doesn't like to hang out at all near these fatty acids, so we will often see water outside the cell in the extracellular fluid, as well as inside the cell. We'll see water on this side, but we will not often ever really see water through here, and that helps allow water to pass. Okay. The yellow stuff in here, we actually are seeing these really long cytoskeleton fragments on the inside of the cell, and so that's kind of what you're seeing here in the remaining. So again, remember, this is the fluid mosaic model. It's called that because the cell membrane is very fluid. Everything is moving around. Nothing really stays in one place. And mosaic meaning everything is made up. This membrane is actually made up of many, many different molecules. And so it is given the term fluid mosaic model. And actually, with the fluid mosaic model, it's very fluid. If we were to hit the cell membrane, those lipids would move with that object, and then by the nature of the chemical makeup of these molecules, they move back, such as the video showing right over here. And so also we want to keep in mind that the membrane is a semi-permeable membrane, and semi-permeable means that only certain things can get through. And so when we talk about how cells eat and drink, which we will this week, only certain things are going to get through that cell. An example is when I have a screen window and I want to open it up at night. Right now it's pretty cool at night. I'm going to open up my window, and of course I might get some water coming through if it rains. I certainly will get some air coming through, but I hopefully won't get any scary bugs. And I don't want any bugs in, so I put these screens on the windows, and hopefully they won't come in. So it's selectively permeable. I'm hoping that only certain gases and liquids will get through. So the membrane is selectively permeable. Okay, next video we're actually going to talk about how cells eat and drink.